My name's Phil Tickle. I'm co-founder of Cibo Labs. We were established earlier this year after 30 years in the remote sensing and agricultural sort of game. I've had a decade of frustration on our the way that we're advancing our ability to monitor and manage our feed base, and in the last few years there's been some major shifts in technology that really allow us to do a lot of the things that we were trying to do 10 years ago that we haven't been able to. So as a company, we're a data analytics company, and we're really focusing on being a platform for other service providers. So we don't want to put another app in your pocket. We want to work with other service providers to deliver value through the remote sensing technologies. We want to answer questions around how many kilos of biomass have you got per hectare, what sort of feed base, what feed on offer have you got, what your ground cover levels are, what your land condition is, and how your land condition is changing over time, and to do that in a data-driven environment. We hear a lot about drones, and while there's been some revolutions in drones, I'd actually argue there's been way more revolution in remote sensing capabilities generally, particularly satellite remote sensing. We've now got the ability to, every day across the globe, image the entire globe at 3 to 4 metre resolution at 4 bands, and we can do it every 5 days with 13 bands of data at 10 metre resolution. So there's been an enormous revolution in remote sensing. And just those slides there, we've got the ability to do multispectral imaging every week. We can turn that into a fractional ground cover map, so we can tell you every single week at 10 metre resolution what your ground cover levels are. We can tell you how much bare ground you've got, how much photosynthetic vegetation you've got, and how much dry matter you've actually got sitting on top of that green vegetation. And we can also tell you what your tree cover levels are. So we've got the ability now to at a 10 metre resolution, so well and truly under a hectare, every week to produce an estimate of biomass across your property. Scales, we can do this basically at a range of scales. So on the bottom right there, we've got a property, a couple of 100 hectares at Denmark and WA, 2 hectare paddocks. The other end of the spectrum, we've got properties across the Barkly there that we're working with. They're million hectare plus properties, and we're basically delivering the same product into a 2 hectare paddock or a 10,000 hectare paddock. They're basically getting the same data every 2 to 3 weeks. There's some real challenges around the ability to generate pasture biomass, and part of it's actually ground data collection. So we can't forget there's a lot of tech, there's a lot of sensors going on here, but we've actually got to get onto the ground, and we've got to calibrate these sensors to be meaningful. And there's an enormous amount of variability, as you know, as you walk across a paddock. Every time you take a step, the biomass is changing by tens to hundreds of % every time you put your foot on the ground. So you might see an image there. We actually got Sean Starling out in the paddock there and cutting grass there, which was a bit of a feat. He was cheap labour for that day. But since August, we've been monitoring basically the Karwala Pastoral Enterprises. So we've got all the properties being imaged. Darren was there as well. Oh, Darren, I didn't see you. Sorry. Darren was really cheap too. So we're monitoring the entire enterprise, and this is really the ability here to get the entire enterprise basically up on a screen every week and look at the variability across the paddocks. And you can see there just a snapshot. There's enormous variability across the property. Just a little animation here. So we've now got the ability here to look at basically every 10 metres on the ground, an estimate of the changes in pasture biomass in terms of kilos per hectare. And you can see a map flashing over the top of that. So every paddock is then summed up. Basically every time we produce an image, we also then produce a paddock level estimate of biomass. You can also see in there that we've actually got the trees removed. So we removed the trees out of the paddock. The clouds that might have been part of the image, they get removed. So we've actually got a net estimate of pasture biomass based on the net grazable area, with trees and other things removed as well. Importantly, if you're not talking about biomass, we can actually do change products as well. So in this case here, this is probably a critical one. Every 15 days we can roll forward and give you an estimate of biomass, and then we can look back 15 to 30 days and tell you how much that biomass has changed. So those red areas basically are saying that the biomass is actually only 40% of what it was basically 30 days before. The sort of yellow areas are about the same, and the green areas are basically saying it's going forward. So thankfully the centre pivot in the middle there with the loose and Darren's actually going forward at a greater rate. So you can then translate that into your feed on offer estimates. So we produce a spreadsheet, dump that into a feed on offer table in a spreadsheet, and produce a total feed on offer across the enterprise. But importantly, we actually don't want to be doing this. We want to be feeding into apps to do that. Land conditions critical as well, so same sort of thing here. Every 5 days we're getting an estimate of ground cover. The red areas are areas that are dominated by bare ground. The green areas are dominated by photosynthetically active vegetation. The blue areas have basically got dry matter sitting over the top of them. And there's a little image simulation on the bottom there. So we can then tick over, and that's all red because they're low biomass levels across the enterprise there at the moment, and you can see a centre pivot there in the middle of Karwulla, where we've got a couple of thousand kilos of biomass per hectare. Importantly for us, we actually don't want to build apps. So we've had a great demonstration here with Hitachi, with Pear Tree and with AgriWebb, being able to directly feed these estimates of biomass straight into their apps. So every 5 days we're basically posting an estimate of kilos per hectare per paddock into any one of these apps. Now, I suppose the game changer for us now is we've now got the ability through these platforms to really start to shift the ability for a producer to access data. So over the next 6 months, we've now got the capacity to process data on demand. And it's our intention over the next 6 months to build a platform for every producer in the country that's using a platform like MyMLA. You'll be able to come in, look at your property and basically get an estimate of ground cover, tree cover, and then if you want pasture biomass as well and how that's changing, we're going to be delivering that to every property in the country within the next 6 months. Thank you.